Hi, my name is Ian Anderson, and this is Andy Lieb, and we work for the UNC School of Medicine, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Contact information if you're interested. And we're here today to talk about scaling Plone across an enterprise-type organization, in our case, a significant size university school. We have about 150 Plone sites spread across 40 ZOAP containers. Those are contained on, currently they're contained on 12 different servers, each one having 4 gigs of RAM, 100 gigs hard drive space, but that's almost never a concern, and 4 CPUs each. We have around 3,500 content editors, which is a lot to keep up with. Very few of those are heavy editors, and so therefore they don't tend to edit most of the time, but every year or every other year they actually get around to editing the site. And we have a core group of maybe 25 or 30 different editors who edit on a much more regular basis. On any given weekday, we see 20,000 or so unique visitors and 40,000 to 80,000 hits. So it's a reasonable size installation. We started this project back in, I started this project in 2006, but the project was started in 2003 when the incoming dean of the School of Medicine gave the mandate to standardize the look and feel of all of the web properties in the School of Medicine and UNC Healthcare. This then formed a committee, which is wont to do in a university, and we started with a web steering committee, and so around 2005 or 2006, we were ready to actually start work. We developed a design and started off in Plone 2.5, which was suggested by my boss at the time. He had a lot of experience working with Capstrat doing Plone 2.1 for curriculum installation. We had an application that allowed first and second year students to access course information and course schedules and whatnot. And so we took that and applied it to this much larger project. At the time, it was pretty much Plone. WordPress wasn't really there, Drupal wasn't really there. You could go with a commercial thing, or Contribute was the other main suggested component, where you'd have a set of templates and use the Adobe product Contribute. And I'm not sure if any of you have experience with doing that on an enterprise level, but it's kind of disastrous. Requirements were gathered by the steering committee, who had very little interaction with actual users, but they were the committee that came up with the bureaucratic process that we used to determine what we were actually going to do, hopefully based on the dean's requests. And we then took that and ran with it, tried getting user support in there. We attempted to contact as many users as we can, as many stakeholders as we could, and get their opinions as to exactly what should be included. Banners was a must-have, flash support, those types of things. Rotating banners, big flashy things. Flash tags everywhere. I jest. This was a period of a lot of transition for the School of Medicine. Beforehand, each department, each center, each program, each division, whatever you want to call them, all had their own web property. They all had developed their own way of doing things, usually involving a set of HTML files stored on a server somewhere, being served statically. We had a lead designer who was encouraging people to use Dreamweaver and Contribute at the time, and so there was a lot of built-up support for that style of doing things. And then there's the inevitable custom web applications that we had to figure out how to integrate in with this unified environment that we were trying to go to. At the time, so the decision was made to use Plone. At the time, Plone 2.5 was the most recent version. So we started going forward with that. We had a design, we had a system, we had an architecture, and then I started working with the organization at that point. We came up with a systems architecture, and we're going to go through the systems architecture and then go through the actual evolution of the Plone system. So when we started, we were using Solaris. I'm not sure if any of you are aware of Sunsight or iBiblio, but those are UNC properties. And so Solaris was a very entrenched operating system at the time. We had some fixed hardware resources, tiny little 1U boxes with a bunch of hard drives in them. And that's where we started. It was relatively successful to begin with, but we had a lot of trouble getting caching worked out. And we had one unified ZOP, one ZIO. Well, we had 4 clients and then one ZIO backing it up. And so we had to use caching pretty heavily. This was difficult to convince people was a good idea. It was very difficult to see your changes because things weren't picked up immediately. Purging wasn't always respected. And we very quickly hit the limitation of what the hardware could do. We had problems with overheating, and when that box, that is the only thing that's hosting your ZIO, overheats and goes down, well, the entire thing goes down. So we decided this was a bad idea. VMware was the new guy on campus, and so we started investigating VMware. And this is where we are today. We have 12 virtual machines on a VMware install, a large VMware cluster, which allows us to migrate our machines around as different pieces of hardware go down so that we're more isolated from the hardware resources. We're using Linux instead of Solaris, which, again, significant change. It allows us to use a package manager, allows us to be able to use other people's code and not have to do everything completely for ourselves. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with OpenCSW or the Solaris package manager, but it's never up to date and it's often non-working. VMware, Linux, Apache, Squid, HA proxy, we were able to build a solid platform for us to grow our site on. And in that time, we went from maybe 5,000 to 20,000 hits a day. We use Apache currently as our redirect engine up front. We still have a number of static resources and static content out there that are legacy products. So we have Apache sitting up front. Behind that, we're using Squid to do reverse proxy caching. We have 1 Squid per ZOP instance, and so therefore we have 40 ZOP clusters, so we have 40 Squids. Sitting in between Squid and the actual ZOP, we have HA proxy, allowing us to do our load balancing between the two. We have 2 ZOP clients per cluster. HA proxy does the load balancing between those two. And then we have each VM with a number of ZOP clusters on it. We determine which sets of clusters to put together on a machine by using various metrics, including, do you remember what we used?
Well, we used a combination of things. We used a lot of stuff that we garnered from Google Analytics in order to get an idea of how heavily trafficked they were. We also tried to run like a script to count how big the ZODB was for each one so that we could get some idea of if that site was particularly content heavy and if it had a particular load that, perhaps it has video or some other media on it that it might require more resources to run. So, basically we used almost those 2 things exclusively to determine which ones would fit on there. And so over, the course of a fairly short amount of time, we were able to determine which sites could be packed onto which virtual machine. And so we ended up with probably a maximum of, 4 for less heavily trafficked sites per, virtual machine.
Containers.
4 ZOP containers, or Plone sites, if you will, per virtual machine. And anything more than that, we started running out of RAM in particular because our VMware guy really, because he has to divvy it up over the entire university, is loath to give out more than about 4 gigs of RAM per machine. And so with that sort of limitation in there, that really defined how we were going to split things up.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah, please.
Do you run several Plone sites at one ZOP?
For the most part, we have 1 Plone site per ZOP cluster. We have a single cluster that we call small sites because it's a number of small, rarely used properties I guess they're either small or rarely used, or small and rarely used. And we have approximately 75 Plone sites in that one cluster. But that one's sitting alone on its own dedicated VM. And then we have the primary school site, the med.unc.edu property on its own VM and its own cluster, because that's the highest number of hits that we get for any given site. As you can guess, we need a technology to be able to manage all of these different clusters. We all of a sudden found ourselves with 40 some odd clusters on 10, 12 different machines. Well, 10 at the time, now we have 12 different machines. And we had no way of managing them. We had no way of figuring out which ones were where, or being able to make changes with any sort of ease. So every time we wanted to do a software release, a new version of Plone came out. We wanted to release a new package, we needed to make an update to our theme. We were going to 40 different properties and running build out. This is long and tedious. So we found hostout, collective.hostout, and it was more commonly used a couple of years ago and seems to be, I think I'm pretty much the only one using it anymore. We have a large hostout installation. Each one of our clusters is an entry in hostout. What that allows me to do is I can say hostout deploy all, hostout all deploy, and then it deploys all 40 clusters. Or if I need to make an update, I can say hostout all upload build out and then run build out, and that allows me to rerun build out on all 40 of them.
Do you have a question?
Yeah. No, you said host out. I'm sorry.
Please use the microphone.
Oh,
I'm sorry, I forgot before.
There we go. It was just a really simple question. Host out is something that you guys wrote yourselves and rolled yourselves, or is it like a product you found somewhere and are using?
Collective hostout is found on PyPy.
Okay.
It is not a product we wrote ourselves. I've written several extensions for it, which have also been released on PyPy, most of which aren't very applicable to anything outside of what I'm doing. But no, that is not our product. It is something that you can go find more information about on PyPy.
Okay, very cool. Thank you.
Okay, hostout. Best tool ever when you're trying to do all of these sites. It is based on Fabric, and so you can roll your own Fabric scripts, and I know a lot of people are doing that way now, but hostout wraps around Fabric and gives you a much more simple configuration utility to actually generate all the fab scripts that do this. Each ZOP container is represented by a hostout host, and so therefore you can do a deployment on any given one, or on all of them, or on any set of them at any given time. We've combined this with our development environment, so we have a unified build-out that we use for development and deployment, and that allows us to have a single set of eggs and a single set of packages and versions that we use across everything. We're starting to split this up a little bit more because we want multiple different types of testing environments, but that is where we are today. So recently, we have discovered several issues with our stack. HA Proxy is introducing disconnect errors in the ZOP clients, and we're not entirely sure why that is yet. We've gotten a partial handle on it, but it's still there. Squid seems to be introducing a lot of overhead. We have way too many squids. We have 40 squids for 40 clients. We should have far fewer numbers of squids, possibly one per machine, possibly one big caching server. Due to our configuration, purging does not work. So when Plone.app.caching sends out a purge request to Squid, Squid says, I don't know what you're talking about, and ignores it completely. You have these lovely purge queue full errors in your ZOP log. And due to the way we have Apache configured, we have a 10 megabyte Apache comp file. It's 10 megabytes of text.
Okay, so some of that is in fact legacy. So
Some of that is in fact
some is
legacy.
legacy, and in fact we actually have to deal with that as well, because we still serve static content, and in fact there are holdouts within our organization that will still only use their static content, and so years ago.
All of that aside, it's a 10 megabyte.
It is very large, and it's not entirely our fault.
Yes. So on to Plone specifically. When we started, we were in Plone 2.5. Not sure how many of you were, how many were using Plone 2.5 back in the day? Yeah, just a couple. So those of you who were will remember this as the bad old days of yore. We did not have generic setup. We did not have eggs. We did not have build out. Those tools were introduced during Plone 2.5's lifetime. So when we started, we had a Solaris box with a custom-built environment. We had to build Zope ourselves. We had to put it in place. We had to get all the packages that we wanted into the Zope packages directory. Everything was using the extensions directory because they were all Zope packages. None of these were eggs. They were just folders that you dropped into place. Generic setup was non-existent. All of your setup was done in Python, which meant that you had an extensions directory with an install.py, and that could call whatever else you needed it to do. This was not reproducible. It mostly worked, most of the time. And then generic setup was introduced in 2.5. It allowed us to simplify our configuration greatly, but it didn't entirely work. Generic setup in its incarnation in 2.5 was about 50% complete, which meant that the things that the documentation said that it would do, it did not do. Try as you might, you still were using your Python files. We introduced build-out at this point. Build-out was, the recipes for distributing Plone were introduced along with Plone 3. Most of them were backported to 2.5 fairly soon after that. And
Yeah.
we were able to introduce build-out as towards the end.
We did have some issues with the earliest versions of build out for 2.5, and in fact, one of the hardest things in our organization was convincing the rest of the team that it was the way to do it, that it did in fact produce a repeatable deployment, and that it did do everything that we said it was supposed to do, because as with the case with generic setup, it wasn't 100% there, and so you would see some of its shortcomings. I mean,
For example, multiple files did not work. So you had a buildout.cfg file. If you wanted to have a secondary file, it just didn't read it properly. It would sometimes work, it would sometimes ignore it completely, depending on which OS environment you were in. That was special fun.
it was, and you know, the ecosystem has grown quite a bit over the years to support pretty much anything you want to do, and there's, you know, been lots of smart people doing good things with it that makes everyone's life a little bit easier. But you know, at that time, there were, you know, the base packages that were available. I don't even remember what they were, but it was enough to get a Plone 2.5 site deployed. But we did have some issues with repeatability at that point. Yeah.
We introduced track and subversion. At this point, our organization had never used source code management tools or product management tools before. That was another big change that we introduced. Contribute was the name of the game. Static HTML files that were edited straight on the server with no reproducibility or repeatability was the name of the game at that point. Also in the 2.5 era, we introduced eggs. Again, as Plone 3 was introduced and we were attempting the transition, we were able to start moving towards eggs, which made it remarkably easier. And I know we're all very comfortable with eggs today, but at that point, they were pretty new. And luckily, we were able to transition away from that onto Plone 3.
Right, so Plone 3, we transitioned our entire stack to Plone 3, and that was actually a really good thing. And so we had spent, the initial deployment happened in what, 2006 for 2.5? And so we stayed on Plone 2.5 while Plone 3 was being developed, and we actually were working through a number of performance issues and system architecture issues, and you know, everything that happens with the first time when you deploy kind of a big enterprise system. And so in that time, sort of almost a skunk works, but not quite, but you know, we started very slowly and quietly working on porting everything over to Plone 3, which you know, entailed basically a rewrite. And since no one had done Plone 3 before, particularly in our organization, it was a slower learning curve, I would say, and it took most of a year for us to get it sorted out. And some of that was because it was a moving target, and you know, Plone 3 was being developed as we were, you know, writing, you know, trying to track what was going on with it. And so, you know, some of the things that we ended up doing in our Plone 3 product architecture was that we wanted to consume more of the central services. And so in this time at the university, a consulting firm, like an accounting firm, had come out and there was a big budget crisis, and they said, you need to consolidate IT services and make all of your schools consume the central IT. And so we said, yeah, we'll play game with you, we'll play along with that. And so one of the things that we really wanted to do was actually use the campus LDAP. And so our campus LDAP has, 100,000 entries, maybe more, and the way that they have it set up is, fine for their organization, and every student gets an LDAP entry, every staff member, every faculty, and then they have, however
60,000
deep,
groups.
yeah, 60,000 groups. I mean, it's a pretty big one, and if you know anything about the way that Plone handles LDAP, it likes to pull it all in and sort it out later. And so we started meeting with the ID management team in order to get on track with the way that they would do intake and let people go, and so that we could sync everything up and we didn't have to manage local accounts. And so part of this too was within our organization, we were using our own ID system that was also LDAP, but it wasn't really synced up with campus, and we really wanted to move away from having our own custom solution.
Well, we had been told that we had to
we need to decommission it, and so we transitioned away from the School of Medicine ID, the SOM ID, to just using campus LDAP, and that was actually a really good thing. But again, that was like another element that we needed to integrate into our policy and into the way that we did, that we set up all the sites and our products. Another thing that was, and the other reason why we went ahead and did, integrated LDAP the way that we did was to not try to shoehorn Shibboleth into Plone 3. And we didn't feel comfortable trying to use a single sign-on like that. And for better or for worse, we think that we think it was for the better to not use it. But a lot of the web properties at our university do use Shibboleth, and they do use a single sign-on solution. But
none of them have the number of editors that we have.
Yeah, but we knew that some of the drawbacks with using Shibboleth is that we would still end up having to manage people within Plone, which we did not want to do.
Shibboleth does authentication, but not authorization.
And so we would still end up having to consume somehow. And so we wanted to outsource as much of that to main campus because they were already doing it. And as you may or may not know, you can in fact map the roles that you get into from your LDAP into ZOAP roles. And so, when people have when they log in, they get the right permissions essentially. The other thing is, Ian was talking about previous, was that we were planning to split this all up into multiple ZOAP containers. And so we wanted to modularize our code enough so that it would be easily deployed across everything. Some of the other infrastructure things that we had going on at the time is that we had a Google search appliance. And so we had paid for the license for a number of years for this thing because we felt that we had the use case that we had documents everywhere that needed to be searched and brought into Plone, and it turned out not to really be the case. And some of the things that we learned about the Google search appliance is that it can be very, very aggressive with its indexing, and it actually brought our sites down on more than one occasion with a software update or with the wrong, like a slip bit, or you didn't click save at the right time, and it would really bring a site down. There was a add-on product that was for Plone 2.5, the Plone 2 series, called Google SA, I think, or something.
Google SA tool.
Google SA tool, yeah. Oh, was it? Okay, and it was and it worked very well, and it was a good integration to it. But we were integrating that into there. We also introduced a namespace.
But I was going to say, the Google search appliance has the capability of killing however fast your web server is. Google is extremely good at indexing things very fast, and they've put this into their search appliance. And however fast you think your web server is, it is not fast enough to handle Google search appliance if you don't throttle it properly. Just as an aside.
And in all reality, we weren't really using the Google search appliance. I mean, that thing has extensive enterprise search capabilities and indexing capabilities, and we were using like a single collection. And you could have, multiple collections. I mean, almost an infinite number of them, as much disk space as you had. And, you can do all sorts of stuff with it. And we really weren't using it. We didn't know that Plone's built-in search would probably suffice, for the majority of our things. But so anyway, we were moving forward into Plone 3, and we were trying to consume central services. We were trying to integrate these other things in our infrastructure. And at the same time, we were also trying to keep up with, Plone development best practices. And so we moved into our own namespace, the UNC SOM namespace. And we also started looking at trying to provide more custom products in-house because we felt that we were getting the expertise. And so one thing that we had noticed is that with everyone wanting their own Plone site is that there was a fairly substantial overhead for a Plone site. And we figured that a lot of them didn't really need it. They would just need like a navigation reset and their own banner and essentially, you know, like a bare minimum. And that if we could get away with just giving them a folder and then giving it a marker interface through the ZOP interface, then we could, you know, really, succeed in keeping the size of the site down, the Plone site.
We reduced the number of sites we had from 250 down to 150 by doing that. And a Plone site by itself takes up between 3 and 4 megabytes of space. A Plone folder takes up several kilobytes, but it's still a very small entity when compared to 3 or 4 megabytes per Plone site.
And so we actually based our code, we wrote it just about at the same time as another community product called Collective Lineage came out. And interestingly enough, the code was quite similar, and someone else had the same idea and sort of beat us to the punch, which is fine because it was a well-written piece of code and actually had provided some things that ours didn't. But we felt that ours, because we customized it so much, because each site, according to our policy, needed to be set up exactly the same, and so we had, you know, portlets that automatically showed up in the right places, and, you know, there were various other things that we configured so that all the sites, you know, basically were the same when they were first laid out. The other thing that, you know, we did that we were slowly moving towards, and that we've realized a little bit better through the various, you know, incarnations of our site products, is that we were trying to encapsulate the customizations in our products instead of in Plone. And that was something that we had, you know, had sort of bitten us, you know, as we started doing our migrations from 2.5 to 3, is that there was so much stuff that was customized directly in the Plone site in 2.5 that it made the migration into Plone 3 a little bit harder. And so we ended up having to write a lot of custom migration code. And unfortunately, at the time, we didn't realize what a win products.content migration really probably would have been for us. So we kind of reinvented the wheel a little bit, but we felt that at the time, we felt that it was a good decision to just go ahead and write our own thing to migrate all this over. And so we wrote quite a bit of Python code in order to get all the content out of the Plone 2.5 site and massage it into what it needed to be for Plone 3. So some of the other things that we started doing as part of this development process and refining our development process is we started making more of an emphasis on unit testing and automated unit testing, and actually configuring our Subversion repository to integrate with it so that it would, you know, tell our build bot and then Hudson afterwards to, you know, automatically test every time someone checks something in. And as we started running build out more, we realized that it was kind of slow. It was one of these things that, you know, you sat around waiting. If you've ever used build out, you know that sometimes you can wait for a little while for things to happen. And so we went ahead and established our own PyPy mirror, which, you know, was actually really convenient once we realized how much space it would take, and it didn't die all the time. But it actually, I mean, that thing was a huge win because it went from, you know, taking say 10 or 15 minutes to run build out at times to taking minutes.
And that is a build out. You can find it on GitHub if you look under iAnderso. I've got a build out there to make your own custom PyPy mirror. You need about 50 gigs of space or so, but it's a good thing to do if you're running a lot of build outs. And you're welcome to use this one, pypy.med.nc.edu. It is not blocked, it's not firewalled. Have at.
Yeah, if you're on the East Coast, they can be faster. And so, you know, essentially with all of these things, we really felt that we had, you know, a more solid sort of basis, a code base. And so we ended up with basically 3 or 4 products, really. So we had the subsite product that we installed on everything. We had our theme product, which contained all of our, you know, customizations to the portlets and the viewlets. We had a policy product, which we tried to encapsulate all of our, you know, policy, security, that sort of thing, permissions into that one particular product. And these were installed on all of our sites. And the other one that was a really big change for us was we actually wrote another product called Content Extenders, and that used Archetype Schema Extender, which allowed us to not have to subclass things. So it was, you know, sort of the shift in, you know, writing code from subclassing to using adapters was actually a really kind of a fundamental thing in the way that you might think about stuff. And so we were able to actually integrate things that, you know, had kind of eluded us before or might have been more difficult because of basically because of that product. And so, you know, the extensions that we wanted to put on, the additional fields that we wanted to put on, you know, a page to allow people to configure the banners or to, you know, have more fields on the event type, you know, was finally realized in a sensible sort of way. And, you know, with all these customizations that we had rolled out, we felt fairly confident in you know, our ability to provide, you know, Plone services to our community, to our customers. And one thing that came out of this was that there is a group that bridges the UNC Healthcare and the medical school, and they're the communications team. And so at our organization, every doctor in the hospital is also faculty on the medical school. And so the research that they do and the clinical stuff that they run all sort of, you know, blend together. And so they have a news reporting team that does it. And they were really interested in getting some more specialized stuff for, you know, a site that would allow them to produce news. And what made it, you know, so much different than what our other customers were doing is that they used it as an all-day app. Like, they produced news in it. They didn't just, you know, have a website that they updated. This was something where they actually produced content using Plone as a platform in a sense. And so we were able to cook up a custom theme for them and to make other various customizations that allowed them to do their job a little bit more easily. The other thing that was nice is it allowed us to sort of experiment and get, you know, features that it turned out that other people, like our bigger user base, wanted, that were sort of exemplified in the healthcare site. And so we stuck with what we had. Plone 3 out for about a year, maybe a year and a half. And we got very excited about Plone 4 and some of the things that, you know, it promised, mainly that we could use a more modern version of Python, which was very exciting in and of itself. And we felt that, you know, I mean, it was worthwhile for us to try to, you know, push that forward as soon as we could. What we found out, though, is as we were moving forward, is that we didn't really have a clear migration path. And so a lot of this was done by trial and error, and there's a list of steps that we ended up taking in order to migrate our sites into Plone 4 that was, I don't know, like 50 steps long, where it was, you know, some of it was voodoo, where you were uninstalling things at the right time and reinstalling things, and, you know, moving the data FS around and running build out here and exporting this, that, and the other thing. And, you know, we had to, but, you know, essentially our product, we use a number of third-party products, as most people do, and we had to make sure, we had to vet all those products and make sure that they were compatible with 4, and, you know, that we could customize them the way that we had been doing with the Plone 3, you know, the ones that were compatible with Plone 3. And some of the other changes that we wanted to implement was moving away from the Google search appliance. The licensing became a little bit too expensive, and we realized, like I said before, that we weren't really using it for anything other than, you know, you could get from Plone Search, or, as it turned out, from the Google Custom Search or Site Search. I can't remember what the product is called.
Google Custom Search is the free version. Google Site
Search is, yeah.
Right.
And so we determined that we could pay
20,000. The Google Search Appliance is 20,000 a year for the license per box, and you need at least 2 of them. And the Google Site Search is 2,000 a year. So we factor of 10 or more by just making that change.
And so we went ahead and migrated to the other one. But what, you know, it was actually kind of a tricky migration, because there was so much stuff that was sort of built up onto the Google Search Appliance in order to integrate it in with our Plone site. And some of the other decisions that we made is that we wanted to, you know, move further from customization and try to track more with, you know, what Plone delivered by default. You know, that we, of course, can't just deliver a plain Plone site, because we had enough theme customizations and enough policy stuff and security stuff that we had to worry about. But we wanted to minimize the amount of customization that we did, because a lot of the decisions that we had made in the past were based on not really understanding what you could do with Plone out of the box. And it is a very powerful system, and some of it is just, you know, if you're unfamiliar with it, then you can very easily make a decision that you don't realize isn't quite right. And so, for example, we had decided one of the project people who has subsequently left had decided that being able to do directory listings for anonymous users was
You couldn't do
you shouldn't be able to do that. And so one of the things that came out of that is that now anonymous people have the ability to copy things but not paste them. And things like that are a little confusing to people because they wonder why would I see a blank screen with a copy button on it, or something along those lines. And so we've worked pretty hard to sort of reverse some of those decisions. I would say one of the biggest things that confronted us in moving into Plone 4 was getting rid of Plone for Artist Calendar. And there's a lot of snickering. And so, and in fact, Nathan wrote a very handy utility that we ended up using quite a bit. But
modifying.
well, and the other thing that we wanted to do was sort of drop support for Flash per se, still allow people to upload it, but just use a file. And blob storage was being introduced or had been introduced, and so we really wanted to, the products that people had produced for Plone 3 that were Flash specific, we really wanted to move away from. Part of it is that we are under, since we work for a university and the site is for a university, it has to be accessible, and Flash is not 508 compliant. It is not accessible at all. And we actively discourage people from using it for that reason alone, is that someone will sue us eventually, and as other people in universities know. And so we can't actively discourage people by telling them no, and we can't block them, but we make it harder for them to use in a sense. I mean, they could still do it. They can upload a file if they want to, but we don't have it configured so that it will automatically stream a Flash site necessarily.
Which means that they can be sued, but we can't.
But so, and again, like I said, the migration steps for this were, incredibly long, and this was a manual migration, and we gathered the entire team together and said, this is it, we're going to upgrade all the sites today. And it was basically, that was what we did. And so most of the sites we were able to, through our various machinations, we were able to export, import, and run build out and move DataFS around and generate all this stuff. But there were, of course, some that didn't go over very easily and that required a little bit of special attention. And we ended up using Transmogrifier for that, which we probably should have done for all of them, just because it takes the content out and leaves all the configuration that gets persisted in the database behind. And it's really a clean way, and that's one of the things that we have actually learned. And this was before the Plone team had really focused on a migration path, an in-place migration path. And so, the Plone 2 to Plone 3 was a huge change because it required so much software development and architecture. The 3 to 4 was more like, what's going to work? What do we need to get rid of? How do we make everything migrate? And instead of it being like a year-long process, it took like a week basically for us to migrate everything.
It took 2 months to test.
Well, it took a lot of time, but I mean the actual time for us to spend in a room together to migrate all the sites, I mean, it was done pretty quickly in a sense, and we didn't have to do a lot of refactoring, and we didn't have to do a lot of, I guess refactoring really. We didn't have to refactor the products very much at all, and so, and then, so how long ago would you say that was? About a year?
It was last year.
Yeah, that was last year, and so our most recent migration has actually been to drop old style Plone theming and move to Diazo. And that is another thing that has been a huge win for us. It has also allowed us to expand sort of the way that the website works for people, because the site had been originally designed in 2006, 2007, even previous to that.
2004.
Yeah, maybe 2004. So it had a very dated look, and people were not so happy with it. And they wanted a much more modern look to it, which is what we were trying to provide. They also wanted to have things like sliders and other things that look nice. And previous to this, it was a very static looking site, and we added a lot of dynamic sort of elements to it. The other big objective for this migration for us, besides dropping a lot of the customizations and returning even closer to vanilla Plone, was we wanted to automate the migration and make it easy for people to deal with. And so essentially what we ended up doing is we set up a way to automate it using Jenkins. And now Jenkins is normally used as a continuous integration server, but you can also use it to kick a lot of stuff off essentially. And so we used it as a master, and it did all sorts of cobbled together stuff that ended up being, you know, since it was a single purpose sort of thing, it worked really great for us. And so we had, you know, we essentially made it very easy for our customers to, you know, want this migration. And part of it was we said we could do it much more quickly. Part of it was that we were adding a bunch of features like, you know, having a horizontal drop-down nav. You know, we were going to have it be an adaptive, responsive design. And so there was kind of a lot of excitement for it. And, you know, we had a new project manager who was trying to publicize it internally and, you know, really make people happy with this thing. And so, like I said, the biggest part of this for us was automating the whole process. And so we utilized our backup and restore across our network. We essentially, we had Jenkins configured with a number of shell scripts to restore the site that we wanted to migrate, you know, in a particular spot on a virtual machine that we created just for this. And then we would, you know, have a build out run yet again by Jenkins with another process. We would have everything the environment needed for it, and then we would run the migration steps. And we used Selenium actually to go through and click buttons where we needed to so that we didn't have to do it. There were a number of other processes that happened where it would, you know, take screenshots of the site that had been migrated and send them to the customer so that they could see what their site would look like, and before they actually got a chance to look at it, so that they could have some idea of what changes they needed to make before we put it into production. And, you know, Plone provides a really fail-safe way for you to, you know, make changes. You can do staging. You can not publish something. But we really felt like this was a courtesy to them because it was such a major change. Like, this theme was, you know, noticeably different than the other one, and we wanted to give people a chance to reorganize their content, because in a lot of cases they might have a horizontal bar that was, you know, 50, you know, menu items deep or something like that. And so we wanted them to be able to reorganize their content before we pushed it out into production. And so they would look at, you know, the screenshots and then decide what they wanted to do. They could go in, and then they had a window of time in which they could do their editing. And if they decided that it was time to go, then we would make another restore. We would do another backup of it and then restore it into the production place. And, you know, again, use Jenkins to build out and have it, you know, and then deploy it into production.
So we're moving forward into Plone 4.3 now. I know we just got to 4.2, but we have this wonderful automated script to do these migrations, so let's just go for it and go for the gusto, get up there. We're moving from Fedora 15 to Fedora 18 currently. I know there's a lot of Ubuntu users out here, but we're from North Carolina. We use Red Hat. Thank you very much. OpenShift is a really neat platform that we'd like to start investigating. It allows Plone to be run as a platform as a service, in a platform as a service environment. I know Juju is another way of doing that, but that type of platform as a service environment is something that really interests us. It allows us to separate systems people from application people a little bit better, so we can have more people working simultaneously without having to step on each other's toes quite as much. And we're definitely going to be looking at doing further automation with the shell script, Selenium, Jenkins architecture that we've built up. Actually, before we do the conclusion, I want to...
You want to show the new site?
Actually,
Yes, yeah. So this is what our site used to look like. Well, it wasn't Google.
being a
Yeah,
live
make it-
demo, it's of course going to fail. This is where we were
Yeah, make it.
in 2006 through 13. And this is where we are now. As you can see, 180 degrees. Much
Okay.
cleaner look
Show them the responsive stuff. It's
Oh,
neat.
yeah.
It's
It's really
responsive.
to go along with fully responsive all the way up and down. And it even holds out well into the Retina style displays. Does not do too great on a 4K display, but find me a 4K display at this point. We'll fix that part. Working on it. It's not a static thing. Diaz is a win. Use system packages. Encapsulate as much as you can. Questions, since we're almost out of time? Please step up to the mic.
You mentioned that you have like an example build out of how you have everything on the website worked out, like with HA proxy and
I
do
have
you
a build out for doing a PyPy mirror. I can put our build out. One of the things we're looking at doing right now is open sourcing a lot of what we've done, and so these will appear fairly soon, and I'll make sure I get that information out somehow.
Yeah.
I've got I can now open source the full host.
We'll put stuff up on GitHub.
And if
let
you're
you
interested,
know, yeah.
come find me later, and I'll figure out a way
yeah.
to get
I'm
you to.
in this step where we're trying to spread things out, and Plone is growing to its limit, so
Yeah.
I'd like to spread it across multiple servers. So.
Please hunt me down.
Yeah,
I'd be happy
cool.
to give you
Yeah.
all of our build out stuff. Other questions?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Oh,
Oh, wait, sorry. Hold on. We have one more. Hold on, we have one more.
one more question. I apologize.
I was just wondering, you mentioned a tool called Host Out early
Yes.
on. Do you still use that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a center point in our deployment strategy at this point. Great. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it does. Yeah, great. If there's nothing else, thank you very much.
Thank you.